Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by hunky, hairy, huggable homos who love film to discuss movies and sometimes dish up a little bit of movie news. Although this week we have so much to talk about. Sorry, movie news. We'll see you next time.
Sorry, new movies. See you later.
With me, as usual, are my wonderful co-hosts, Jim Poliafco. Welcome.
Thanks, and welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Will Lindis is here with us as well. I'm going to call him Wookie Will this episode, thanks to his hat, which you can't see if you're not watching on YouTube. Welcome, Wookie Will.
Hey, guys, it's so good to be back with you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herders.
Who you calling scruffy looking?
Thank you.
Oh, goodness. Well, as Jim mentioned, new movies? What? Why would we be discussing a new movie right now with Star Wars, the new Star Wars film just coming out in a few days? Of course, we'll be talking about Star Wars, The Force Awakens, next week on our 3rd anniversary show, guys. 3 years.
Wow.
Put 3 candles on the cake.
It's going to be a big one.
Yes.
Can we just have one candle that's like shaped like the number 3? Can we cheat?
I think we could. Yeah, we totally could. Yeah,
There's sure. 2 things to be excited for at least next week, right? The new movie, right, which we will have seen at that point, I think, right? The three of us will have seen.
That's absolutely.
And our 3rd anniversary episode, all in 1 week.
That's going to be a hell of an episode. I'm really excited about it.
Indeed. We are super pumped. But we figured this week, in anticipation of Star Wars The Force Awakens, and because there wasn't really anything else out right now we felt like talking about, that we would kind of discuss the Star Wars franchise as a whole, what it means to us, and kind of go through all 6 of the films that are currently out at the time of this recording. So I think, guys, we should probably just say up front, we're going to be spoiling these movies like crazy. Yeah. No question there. I'm sure you've probably seen them all if you're listening to this podcast, but if you haven't, feel free to step away when appropriate. You guys want to get into it? Are we ready to go?
Sure.
So ready to do this, yeah.
Punch it, Chewie.
All right. Well, here we go. Our discussion of the Star Wars franchise. Jim, I left a little space there if you want to throw in some Star Wars music or something. Feel free.
Right,
for sure.
The second drop of Star Wars music.
Indeed. So let's do this. Let's take a couple minutes just to talk a little bit about what Star Wars means to us individually. Like it, love it, hate it, never want to see it again, and then we'll kind of move progressively through the films in plot, timeline, chronological order, rather than like 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. I think it makes things just a little easier. What do you guys think? Are we good with that?
Perfect sense. Yeah. Plus, I think it'll make the end of this episode a little more exciting than the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of theories about. I was reading about how, there's this debate about how to get ready for this new episode 7 that's coming out, and whether you should watch them in episodic order from 1 to 6, or with the prequels first and then the original trilogy, or watch them in some other kind of order. And it's some of the orders they've come up in are kind of crazy. Some people said, well, watch the first 2 of the original series and then watch the prequels, so you kind of get a parallel of Anakin and Luke, as they're coming up, and then and then finish with the last original series movie to kind of keep you fresh for whatever may be coming up in episode 7, which I have no idea what's coming, but it's just kind of interesting, and this fan base is huge, and so vocal and excited at this point. Like, my Twitter is lit up, my Facebook it's kind of crazy right now. You guys, I'm sure, are seeing the same thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything's all Star Wars all the time, I think.
Seen it, contributed to it, right?
Right. Even today on Facebook, everyone's been using the Facebook Star Wars profile picturizer thing to add a lightsaber. You know what I mean, with your picture. Will, I saw yours.
Yeah, well, mine's a slightly different lightsaber. I didn't post it. Yeah,
I didn't see yours.
Color. It was.
Was it a pink dildo? What was it?
Instead of doing blue or red, I chose a black lightsaber.
That was nice.
That lightsaber is so flexible and soft.
Did you actually do that? Seriously?
I took the picture. I didn't post it on Facebook because, some tact. But I sent it to you guys privately.
You did, and now it's on the internet for everyone to see.
Facebook owns it now.
Oh my! And I just saw 3 people jump off the show.
I thought this was a family-friendly Star Wars show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, so let's talk a little about this. Jim, I actually want to have you start because you actually got to see the first movie when it came out in movie theaters back in '77. Did you not?
Yes, I did. I was in high school, and a friend had gone to some premiere in the area where I lived of this movie, and he came back with again, this was in the day when big movies came with programs that you could get with your ticket, maybe for an extra $1 or $2, like a big glossy program of Star Wars with set photos and a plot description and everything. And he brought that to study hall one day, and he's like, "Hey man, I saw this movie called Star Wars. It's fucking awesome." And he's showing me this, and he's telling me about these spaceships and special effects, and sounded cool. And I saw it, and I fell in love with the movie. I mean, it really, really made an impression on me. Saw it several times. It kind of gave me a feeling that none of the rest of the movies could quite duplicate. And that's kind of the same feeling we get, I think, with any kind of sequel situation. When you see a movie that you really kind of fall in love with, it's an original idea or kind of an original concept idea, then you get sequels. The sequels sometimes just don't really match up. So, and that's kind of what happened here. And I was somewhat interested. The second one, I was interested, and the third one I was interested, but they just didn't grab me as much. I'm not saying they're bad movies. And then, the prequels, by the time the prequels rolled around, 16 years later, I had kind of lost interest in seeing more, just more subpar, I guess, Star Wars stuff to me.
Right.
So yeah, that's my relationship with it. I am interested to see what they can do with this. I see this as kind of it may be somewhat. I'm not sure whether it's going to be a continuation of the story. If it's kind of it's not going to be a reboot because they're not going to probably cover the same story ground. But it's almost like they're picking up the pieces again, kind of like the Creed movie did with the Rocky series, right?
Yes.
Very much like that, right? You got new characters, you got new actors. It's got the same basic, background and history and pedigree that the originals had, but hopefully this one will kind of plow its own ground and become its own thing. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, how about you?
Yeah, so obviously I wasn't old enough to see A New Hope, the Star Wars movies in theaters. I caught all 3 of the original trilogy in my youth. They'd all been out. I didn't see any of them when they were fresh. I loved them. The same way a lot of kids kind of my age did. This became a very important part of our childhood, our growing up, and all of that. It's interesting. I was really thinking about what it was that made Star Wars hit so well, and I've been racking my brain, kind of pulling across a few theories, and I think that the original trilogy is an example of one of those films or sets of films that hits. It's exactly what it needs to be at the exact right time for a lot of people. You think that we're kind of in that stage there, late 70s, early 80s. Retrofuturism is fading away. Science fiction is heading towards a lot of like dystopia and like the bleak stuff. We're post-Vietnam and Korea at this point. We've just gotten out of the Soviet space race, all of that. That first film was something that we could look forward to, something where we could kind of recapture some of that, like that hope and that adventure and that excitement. And that's what I think made the new trilogy maybe part of. There's a lot of reasons I think the new trilogy did not connect as well for me. I know, Jim, you mentioned they didn't do as much for you. They didn't do much for me either. You kind of think in that like early 90s, that late 90s stage. We're pre 9/11 at that point. We're in that weird period where, I mean, we're even out of Desert Storm at that point. So we're just kind of in this spot where we don't have a lot of like major conflict going on. So instead of like creating new art for us to try to make sense of things and figure out a new path forward, we started reinventing the familiar. We started like reaching back into the successes of the past. And the problem was that those movies were very derivative of themselves. So we're in an era right now, post 9/11. Things are very uncertain. Things are very fearful. I think we need Star Wars again. I know that's probably maybe waxing a little bit, but I'm really excited about this new movie. I'm really excited about having that spark lit in me the same way the original 3 movies lit something in me.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, growing up, I did not see the first 2 in theaters. I was, they came out before I was born, but I do vaguely recall seeing Return of the Jedi in theaters. I think came out in '83, so I was like 2.
Wow.
But we had these movies taped on cassette tape, and it was always funny because it was like on one tape we had Star Wars: A New Hope, and we had Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. On the third tape we had Star Wars: Return of the Jedi, and then like Merry Melodies or something. So like when Mom and Dad needed time to do other things and didn't necessarily have a lot of time to watch me, they would just put those, give me those 2 tapes. They taught me how to use the VCR. And I ruined those tapes. I mean, I watched the movies so much that I ruined them. I loved the film so much. And, to this day, like, Will, you were quoting that line earlier from Princess Leia from Empire Strikes Back. Like, I know all of these lines by heart. Like, I could probably quote, like, 75% of the movies accurately from start to finish if I had to.
Wow.
And there is something magical about these movies in terms of, especially as a kid, right? There's just this sense of wonder. There's this greater universe. There's this mystical force that connects everything together. There's this battle between good and evil, and this high stakes of a whole planet being blown the hell up, by a giant space station, or is it a starship, or is it a battle station? We know what the script calls it, but there are arguments abound. In any event, safe to say, love the original trilogy. I tend to give Jedi a little more love than some people do, but I still think all 3 movies are great. Prequel series, unfortunately, didn't really do a lot for me until Revenge of the Sith, and even then, I could take like half an hour of that movie and be good. We'll talk more about it as we go into the individual films here, I'm sure, but unfortunately, I was so excited for the prequel trilogy to come out, and I remember the first film, Phantom Menace, came out just before I graduated from high school. So when I walked across the stage with my cap and gown, I actually had a lightsaber like hooked to a belt around my country. I was a total nerd. Yeah, it was awesome. It was super cool. And then unfortunately, we got the prequel movies that we got. But I agree. I think it's a great time to sort of kick this whole Star Wars thing back off again. I think Abrams did a tremendous job with the Star Trek franchise. I'm very anxious to see what he does here. But, as we like to say, everyone get your shot glasses ready. Expectation management. I'm really working hard to kind of tamp down my expectations and just try and go into it as virginally innocent as I can. I had some friends today. Somehow they got into a screening earlier today I don't know if it was a press screening or a special screening or something, but they started like spouting spoilers.
Which friends were these?
I don't want to name them on air. I'll tell you later.
I know Disney was doing some Disney lot screenings.
Yep.
So it might be the. Is it that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And you may know who I'm talking about then.
I don't, but I've kind of heard some of that.
Gotcha.
Were they really like?
In any event, well, I didn't read them. But I just saw someone in the comments say, "You fucking dick! I can't believe you spoiled the whole goddamn movie for me. I'm unfriending you right now."
Wow.
Yeah.
To be fair, I guess it's one thing to like, okay, the movie has now been out for a day or 5 days or whatever, and to spoil it. Like, I get how you can accidentally do that, whatever, but like, I do know, like, sometimes we get into like press screenings early and stuff like that, and I make it a real big point, like, this is like this special rare opportunity. Like, I don't want to fuck things up for other people. Because of this rare opportunity that I got. So, I don't have any sympathy for people feeling it. They got into sneak previews.
It gets to a point where you don't even really want to hear like how amazed you were by it. You know what I mean? Or how disappointing it was. Because even though that's technically not a spoiler, that's just somebody's impression. It's kind of difficult to, I don't know, it warps your expectation a little bit. It
does.
It flavors your expectation. And I don't know if that's really fair, especially in the case of these movies where the anticipation is so high.
Yeah.
That it's. I just hope that there's none of that goes on between now and this. We'll get to see it Thursday night, but between now and this weekend, when most people get to see it.
Yeah, I'm pretty much. I don't know. I'm avoiding Facebook a little bit right now. Because I almost got spoiled earlier, and I don't know. I just want to protect myself before someone wrecks my experience. But at least we're going to the first show, Jim, on Thursday that you can go to.
I know.
Normal human being.
Yeah. You're literally seeing it as early as anyone can possibly see outside of having like connections or something like that.
Right.
But I mean, back to like my first experience with Star Wars, and when Episode 4 was out, before it was Episode 4, it was just Star Wars. That's all it was, and there was no A New Hope. There was none of that stuff. So it kind of set the stage for many like space-based blockbusters that came after it. I remember a few years, I don't know how many years later it was, maybe 2 or 3 years later, the first like big Star Trek movie came out. The one with Voyager and Voyager and all that stuff. It was only 2 or 3 years after, and I guarantee you that it was, prompted by the success of Star Wars. The creators of Star Trek, had to basically, do a movie of their own and capitalize on this sensation that was Star Wars. And some of us liked that Star Trek movie and some of us didn't, but it still has set up this kind of, I'm not going to call it a competition, but and now we have the Guardians of the Galaxy doing the same thing. It really set the stage back then. Lucas and those guys really set the stage for just a new kind of movie, and it was awesome.
And now the stage is being set again. We'll have to see what we get.
Yeah.
But before we can move on to what we are getting, which will be next week's show, special guest Mike Levins and maybe another guest. Why don't
some shenanigans, I'm sure.
And definitely some Movie Bears podcast 3-year anniversary shenanigans. Plans are in the works. But before we can talk about where we're going, we should probably talk about where we've been. So, are we ready to discuss the individual films?
Yes, so ready.
All right. Cool. Again, spoilers, fair game. So, Star Wars: The Phantom Frickin' Menace. What do we? I don't know. I don't even know where to start with this one. The opening crawl. I'll tell you what. I'll share my experience first with this real quick. My big opening crawl. Not evil empire. Not good versus evil. It's the Trade Federation is imposing tax restrictions and blockaded the planet of Naboo. Thank you, motherfucking economics lesson. Really?
Right.
That's the setup?
Well, and the biggest problem with Phantom Menace, and actually the biggest problem with all three of the prequel trilogy films, and we started out here, isn't necessarily the space politics itself. The problem is that everything is presented in the form of people just sitting around talking about stuff, overly choreographed lightsaber fight, people just sitting around talking about stuff back and forth. All three of the films have really bad pacing issues because they don't really know how to structure the action. Things don't ramp up. Like, we've watched movies where it's just people like discussing politics or discussing tariffs or discussing things like that. And when directed well and scripted well, they can be really compelling. Think about a really good courtroom drama. This could have been really something different. It wasn't. Like you mentioned, it's all about the Jedi are dispatched to settle this dispute regarding the taxation of trade routes. Jedis have to do it because I guess if you're good with a lightsaber, that means you're the perfect diplomat, right? So why not send the swordsman to go talk about these space politics? And it just kind of gets bad from there. Honestly, I think this is probably my least favorite of all of the Star Wars movies. I think the other two prequel movies are probably more boring than The Phantom Menace, overall for me at least, because at least this one had some like honestly, as terrible a character as he is, as awful as Jar Jar Binks is, you could never say that he was boring. He was an awful train wreck. That was.
He got a response out of you.
He got a response. And unfortunately, there's lots of this prequel trilogy that did not get that response from me. Maybe that's just me. Not my speed.
So this movie was cool. I don't even remember actually seeing this one for the first time. I don't remember whether it was in the theater or how I saw it the first time, but I remember it was cool to okay, so we're gonna meet young Anakin Skywalker, right? Young Darth Vader, right? Here he is, and this is gonna be his story. And George Lucas has said, I read a little bit about George Lucas, and it said that his concept for this whole thing was really more of kind of like a soap opera, like structured like a soap opera. This was about relationships. First and foremost, this was about relationships between characters, supposed to be, okay, and not so much of an action movie, okay. Now there were action beats obviously throughout these movies, but I don't think that was his prime objective. At least that's what he says now. And you could maybe see some of that. You could see how he was trying to. I think what he was trying to do is kind of expand the world of which this character drama was taking place in. This space-based character drama. He was trying to do that, so we got to see young Anakin Skywalker, Jake Lloyd, right? That's the kid's name. Terrible actor.
Poor kid.
Terrible actor, right? We talk about precocious child actors. Well, that's kind of like Exhibit A of bad actor, but this movie gave us one of the best action sequences in almost all of these movies. Being the pod race.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
I mean, that pod race was pretty freaking awesome. Definitely the highlight of this movie. And for that, for that alone, it doesn't necessarily make it a good movie, but it makes it a movie you probably should see.
Yeah, there's some things in this that we're going to talk about with both this film and the other two where I feel like a lot of the lightsaber battles that we talk about are going to be probably better choreographed here, but because the character development is so poor, you don't care what happens in those lightsaber battles. At least, so I'm jumping ahead slightly, but the three-way lightsaber battle at the end of this, probably one of the best choreographed things in all of the movies. Featuring an antagonist with no personality, a protagonist with no personality, and another protagonist who is set on the bench for a good portion of the movie, so you don't really get a chance to feel why he's feeling the way he is. But the pod race does have those stakes. It's not just an action sequence; it's one with emotional stakes for both the character involved, young Anakin, his mother, and for the other, kind of Qui-Gon and all of them who are trying to figure out what they want to do based on the results of their bets and stuff like that. So I like the pod racing. I wanted to see more of that, like action sequences that meant something.
Well, and I think one thing for me that makes the original trilogy as great as it is it's not all Jedi all the time. Right? Like, we have Han Solo, he's a smuggler, like, he's got his own thing going on. You've got the Rebellion doing their thing, right? Like, the Jedi thing is certainly part of it, obviously, a huge part of it. But these movies, it's like, aside from, like, the Anakin-Padme, like, relationship thing, and even then, Anakin becomes a Jedi, whatever, there's very little that's not, like, Jedi-related moments of the film, right?
Yeah.
So you're just sort of, for me at least, overly steeped in it. Like, I kind of like having a little break from that stuff and seeing what someone else in the ensemble cast is up to. But when the ensemble cast is the fucking Jedi Council, then, like, every story beat you go to has something to do with the Jedi. And it just, I don't know. For me, it's a little much. The one saving grace of the Phantom Menace for me is that Anakin Skywalker is, like, too young to be in a relationship with Padme at that point, so we don't get this horrible, god-awful, like, relationship thing that we get in the movies.
Not yet, we don't.
So at least it doesn't have that, right? I mean, that's nice for me. And yes, Jake Lloyd, I mean, he is kind of one of those precocious kids. I cringe every time he looks at Padme, and he's like, "Are you an angel?" I just want to reach to the screen and, like, bash him across the head.
That's bad. Part of that is bad writing.
Well, it's bad writing too, but
all of it's bad writing. So
you got a little kid trying to work his way around.
And that's the point that I'm trying to make. I mean, yes, you have bad writing, but I also think you have some bad direction from George Lucas. Another thing to remember, he was involved with the original movies. Did he direct all three of the original movies? Did he write all three of the original movies himself? No.
He wasn't the guy doing all of the heavy lifting on them.
No,
yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely not. So we definitely get a very different sort of stilted vision and feel here. But I think there are some good things that are entertaining. The pod race scene. Will, you mentioned that the lightsaber fights are over choreographed. Maybe you don't care as much because the characters aren't as well developed. For me, that last lightsaber sequence actually was pretty phenomenal. A lot of that is probably because of the John Williams Duel of the Fates score that it's set to. I enjoyed. I do like the choreography with the lightsabers, but I do agree. Like, we don't really understand Darth Maul at this point, for one thing. He's just a bad guy. Like, ooh, he's in red and black makeup.
Yeah, I need to be scared of this guy. Right?
Sure, right?
Well,
we just I don't know. He's not that menacing in a movie called The Phantom Menace. It's just not.
And Liam Neeson's not on an airplane or a train, so total miscast of Liam Neeson here. He hadn't obviously found his sweet spot yet as an actor.
Yeah, and I can't really blame him either, because, like, you have to think, like, you look at the original Star Wars trilogy, and you can think about what everybody's, like, character traits are, like what it is that makes them great. Qui-Gon is a really boring character. Like, his personality trait is he's sometimes kind of dry in his line delivery. That's his character trait. So when you have a three-way fight that's villain we know nothing about versus really dry hero versus, and I mentioned this before earlier, there's a large section of the movie where they tell Obi-Wan just to go sit on the ship and wait while everyone else does things. So the only character with any personality in that three-way fight isn't in most of the movie. And then the choreography bothers me, not because the choreography looks bad. It looks really good, but when Qui-Gon does get killed, we have this moment where Obi-Wan could, like, maybe show some emotion, rage a little bit, maybe break out of the choreography and just kind of, like, we saw that in Empire Strikes Back, which we'll get to. When Luke gets pissed off, he just starts swinging like a madman. In this one, as soon as Qui-Gon dies, Obi-Wan goes, "No!" and they go back into crazy over-the-top choreography. So you don't get a chance to feel... You don't get a chance to feel his rage or feel his emotion or feel the loss of his mentor. And I think that's a situation where choreography hurt the emotion of the characters.
Well, and I realize we need to move on to the other movies because my little timer just went off. But you got to remember, with Luke, I mean, he was largely untrained at that point. You know, he hadn't grown up for 17 years or whatever in the Jedi Temple being taught to distance himself from his emotions and, you know what I mean, be able to set that aside to deal with danger. Luke is just kind of a raw nerve. So the experience is... Huh?
Okay.
What?
Yeah,
I'm paralleling.
Yeah, paralleling.
Oh, I got you.
I'm paralleling. Whereas young Obi-Wan Kenobi, right, has gone through this training. He's about to become
He's already a Jedi, right?
Right. Yeah. So, you know, he's ready for the trials or whatever. So, you know, yes, he has that no reaction, right? But then his Jedi training kicks in, and that's something that Luke didn't have to that same degree. So, I don't know. For me, it's a little different. I can understand it a little bit. But I agree, it might have been nice to see a little more.
I just wanted to see characters grow and develop. Like, maybe it is part of his Jedi training, but it still means for me as a viewer that I don't get a chance to get inside of his head. I just get to see pretty choreography.
Right.
I don't know. That was a missed opportunity.
And don't forget, Episode 1 also introduced us to the idea that people are able to use the Force because of, like, little bacteria in their blood.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, the midi-chlorians. We can.
That's right.
We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. You want to just give a collective thumbs down to the idea of over-explaining the magical force?
Yeah.
Over-explain, like. Yeah.
Hey, before we move on to the next movie, we have a live comment from Felipe.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Felipe.
Hello, Felipe. He says,
1, 2, 3 nights.
Yes, Felipe and Susie are seeing the movie with us on Thursday, so excited for that. But he says, as a kid, when the original Star Wars came, I felt like I was the last kid in the world to see it. When I did, it sealed my love for the movies today. After Jedi, I was left wanting it to not be over. Then the prequels came out. While I, too, was a little discounted by the tone, I did feel like they did fill in some of the gaps of the story's past. And there's some truth there. I mean, definitely the movies, and we'll talk more about it as we get into 2 and 3. But I mean, definitely these movies do try to give you more information, right, about this time period we largely knew nothing about. Before we move to the next film, did Phantom Menace do that for you guys? Like, did it make you kind of sit up and be like, oh, wow, this is this other time period, we don't really know much about it, this is interesting? Or were you kind of like, on this one?
More like what Felipe said, like filling in a little bit, especially with the Anakin story. That was it for me. The rest of it, and a little bit of Obi-Wan's story as well.
Yeah.
But beyond that and the pod race, not really much. All the stuff with, Padme and all, I had no interest whatsoever.
Mm.
And the council and nothing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, this is, you could have cut this film out entirely. The only thing that we really needed from this film in terms of storyline progression, everything was really fluff. Even the Palpatine's big gambit here, he repeats kind of in the next film. Setting up some sort of weird thing to gain more power. The only thing we really need to know is Obi-Wan is now training Anakin, and you could have done that in the first 3 minutes of the second movie. Like, you could have cut this movie out entirely and just had someone say, hey, is that your new student Anakin? Yes, it is. And we would have gotten all of the important things we needed to know out of the way. So that was a problem for me.
I don't know. I think seeing him as a slave with his mom as a slave, like struggling to get out of that world, was beneficial. I don't know that you could just throw all that away in a couple lines of dialogue. Like, hey, is that your new student? Didn't he used to be a slave with his mom on Tatooine? I bet he's glad he's here now.
But I don't think we need to know that. Like that doesn't help us with the character.
Oh, I absolutely think it does, because this whole thing is Anakin's eventual slide to the dark side. It's his inability to, like, handle real-world adult emotions like the way that the Jedi thinks that he should be able to do so, right? And his mom being a slave and what happens to her in the upcoming movies plays an important part of how Palpatine is able to manipulate Anakin. But maybe we can talk about that a little more.
I think so. I do want to say, as much as I rag on Anakin, and the actor. Probably the only real emotional beat that I remember from that movie is him being, leaving his mother. You know what I mean? Having to leave his mother was probably the strongest emotional beat in the movie, at least for me.
Because Jedi are all about no attachments, and Anakin is all about attachments. So it kind of sets up this whole thing. But let's move on to Attack of the Clones.
10 years later.
Right?
After puberty.
Right? So in this film, at this point, we've got a clone army that's been commissioned in secret by some other external force. We've got Yoda flipping around with a lightsaber at this point, right? Fans went crazy for that. What did you guys think about this movie? Did this work for you better than Phantom Menace, or what do you think?
Not for me. Was this the roll around in the grass movie?
Yeah.
Oh my God. No, this movie is, for me, this is probably the low point of the series, of the entire 6 movies. Was probably toward the second half of this movie, I would say. I just had no interest at all in seeing the depth of the relationship between Anakin and Padme. I just didn't have any interest in that. It was enough for me to know that they were together. You know, it would have been enough to condense that down into just the basic facts that I needed to know. There isn't a lot. We'll talk about it later, but you mentioned the Yoda flipping around with the lightsaber. I don't know. Maybe people flipped out over that. I thought it looked kind of silly, but that was just me.
Yeah. So while I would say that Phantom Menace had more actively bad scenes, I think that Attack of the Clones was probably the most boring of the movies, and I think that that's probably the worst sin you could possibly have. I did not feel the bond between Anakin and Obi-Wan. It felt very forced. There's just a lot of remember when we did that one thing? And that's supposed to bond them. Whatever, it doesn't work. The love story was really, really clumsy. He totally is going for a soap opera feel here. He even does the reverse shot type thing that you see a lot of times in soap opera, where it's just 2 cameras going back and forth between the POVs of the 2 characters. That's a soap opera thing, and it's usually used because soap operas don't have a lot of budgets and they have tight sets that they have to work with. Lucas didn't have that problem here, and yet he used that same trope. So I get what he was going for. It didn't work, though, because the chemistry between the actors wasn't good, and the script didn't let them... it was a very juvenile relationship. The relationship... And I get that they're young characters, but I mean, it was written from a juvenile perspective. Right. A lot of it's I love you because I now am in love with you. It's very circular logic. Right. We have this long sequence in the middle of the movie where they basically... I want to be in love with you, but I can't because I'm a Jedi. And I want to love you too, but I can't because I'm a senator. Obstacles for the sake of obstacles in a relationship don't make relationships compelling. They make plot beats that we have to work around. So yeah, a large stretch of this movie is a relationship that doesn't work. And the thing is that relationship has to work to make this movie, and I guess really the next movie, have the emotional stakes it needs. So if you don't make the relationship work, the entire prequel trilogy is kind of a bust. So this is where the whole thing, they could have salvaged maybe the Phantom Menace going off the rails. They didn't. I don't know. I think this is where if I were to say that there's one thing that really sank this prequel trilogy, it was how poorly the relationship was handled.
At least we know where Luke gets his whininess at this point.
Yeah.
At one point Anakin's like, he's holding me back. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, oh my God, I was going to go into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters. You just kind of get that same feel. And I agree with you guys on a lot of points, so I won't rehash. One of the things I did like about this film, though, just to give it a little bit of love, is the whole scene where Anakin basically goes and slaughters a whole village of sand people, on Tatooine because they've got his mom, and or had his mom. Mom died, and yeah, I don't know. I think one of the things I was kind of alluding to earlier was Anakin is all about these attachments, right? His mom is such a huge part of his life, right? Now mom is gone, and he couldn't save his mom because, as Palpatine kind of helps point out to him, the Jedi are holding him back. The Jedi are teaching him not to, give in to his emotion. They're teaching him not to have these attachments, and because of that teaching, now his mom is dead. And so as he's going into this relationship now with Padme, which I agree is the most wooden, freaking boringest thing ever in a Star Wars movie, I think what Lucas is trying to do is show you he's developing a new attachment that is going to be very dangerous. Unfortunately, you just, you don't care enough about the two characters, nor does their chemistry work enough that you sort of buy it. So that's unfortunate, but I kind of see where that was trying to go. Some other things that I liked, the scene with Obi-Wan fighting with Jango Fett on top of the rain-spattered roof on the cloning planet of Kamino. I liked that sequence a lot. I like seeing Jedi when, they're not uber all-powerful gods. Like, when someone not a Jedi can come along with their fucking jetpack and, rocket wrist weapons and knock their lightsabers out of their hands and smash their face on the ground. I'm like, yes, do it. Because it's like, you know what? If a Sith can come along and the Jedi and the Sith, battle for 20 minutes, right? And no one's gaining ground. But, a bounty hunter can come along and knock a Jedi on their ass and possibly kill them. It's like, why aren't we seeing more, Jedi against the real threats? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also cool because if you think about this entire prequel trilogy, the majority of the fights are either Jedi versus Jedi or Sith, or Jedi versus, a bunch of disposable robots. This is, and maybe I'm missing a fight somewhere, but is this the only fight in the prequel trilogy that is a Jedi versus a non-Jedi worthy opponent? Maybe I'm missing another one in there somewhere. I'm drawing a blank, but it's all lightsaber battles. There's so many fucking lightsaber battles in this prequel trilogy. This is a nice, refreshing change of pace. So I did like that fight. I agree.
Absolutely. Okay, well, any other thoughts, guys, on Attack of the Clones, or do we want to bank a couple of minutes we lost earlier and move on?
Did we talk? Yeah, I don't have much to say on it, but just I think at the time I was excited about the Yoda thing because it looked really cool. I've watched the movie since, and it doesn't hold up as well when you're not in a crowded theater. You do start to realize that it kind of takes away from kind of the mystique of Yoda. He's this guy with all of these cool mystical powers, and instead he becomes like a gummy bear bouncing here and there and everywhere for a few moments. It kind of takes away from the grandeur of the character by making him too overpowered in another way, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I liked Yoda in some of the more, obviously in the original series movies when he really, had more of a, I guess, of a main role, But yeah, and this one had Christopher Lee, which is always cool. Always like to see him.
Count Dooku.
And this was the Mace Windu came into the series here, right? I don't think he was in the first one, was he?
He was in the first movie.
Yes, he was. Oh, okay.
In fact, it's him and Yoda at the very end when they're talking about the Sith and they're like, well, which one did we kill, the apprentice or the master?
Oh, this is when they're all in the room talking?
Right.
Yeah. More sitting around talking.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Samuel L. Jackson doing his thing. We get more of him in the next couple of movies. But the Yoda scene, I'll tell you, when I saw this movie in theaters, the audience flipped out at the Yoda thing. And I'll admit, when I saw it, back then, I was kind of excited. I was like, oh my god, Yoda's flipping around with the lightsaber. But it just, I don't know, the CGI was just so, for me, not great, that after the first 20 or 30 seconds of this thing starting to unfold, I just felt like I wasn't really watching anything actually happening on the screen except for Christopher Lee, like, moving his arm around. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't feel like there was anything really happening there. And it kind of was disconnective for me in some ways, so...
You could almost visualize, like you could almost see the green screen room that's nothing but just like Christopher Lee holding a flashlight in the middle of it, just kind of swinging randomly at the walls, right? Like you could almost visualize that in that moment.
Right, absolutely.
It was like I said, it felt kind of silly to me, maybe because I grew up on watching wrestling on TV on Saturdays, and this is very un-PC of me to mention this, but as part of the wrestling on Saturdays, they used to have midget wrestling. That they called midget wrestling, all right? Or little people.
Where are we going with this, Jim?
Dwarves and little people were wrestlers, and it looked Yoda flipping around, right? Looks like one of those things you'd see either on wrestling for entertainment or you'd see in a cartoon where you got like this big, huge guy and this little guy just like running through his legs and around his feet and stuff. It just looked really silly to me.
You know, I get that. This is one of the big climactic battles of the movie, right? So you definitely, at least at the end of the Phantom Menace, like the big climactic battle, like had that big score and it felt really like intense. Like it does feel a little silly here, and you don't want to end on a silly note, especially for the second movie of a trilogy, and that's usually second movie of a trilogy is Act 2. That's where the characters are usually at their darkest point, their lowest point. They face their worst obstacles. And for that to happen and for it to be kind of, very cartoonish, it kind of hurts. Like if you look at the entire prequel trilogy as a 3-act structure, which you're supposed to with the trilogy, it doesn't work. So, yeah.
Felipe had another comment. He said, Attack of the Clones, in his mind, was the worst of the series. He said, however, it does have the most important scene in the series. I don't know if he means the prequel series or the entire series.
Probably prequel.
Altogether. Yeah. Which was Anakin's reaction to the loss of his mom. By slaughtering the Tusken village. Basically his first moment giving into the dark side, and we kind of get a glimpse into what he's capable of, and we kind of see, this is kind of it. It's a touching scene, although her death, if you go back and watch that clip, her death is one of these like kind of scene. But again. Definitely, probably the emotional heart of that movie was him fulfilling his promise, right? Well, he had made a promise to her in the Phantom Menace that he would come back for her, and he came back, but obviously it was too late, right? And she died in his arms. But a sad moment and definitely a big turning point. One of certainly, if not the turning point, one of the main turning points for young Anakin going to the dark side. But Felipe, good one.
Absolutely. All right, guys, let's move on to Revenge of the Sith. So for me, this film was the most entertaining of the three. I think it's because the whole series is supposed to be about Anakin becoming Darth Vader, his journey to that, right? And this huge fight between he and Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end. I almost feel like we could have gotten bits and pieces of episodes 1 and 2 as like flashbacks in the first 45 minutes of this movie, and then let the rest of it sort of play out. Cut out a lot of the extraneous bullshit and just have the final fight. And you could have 1 2-hour long perfect movie with the most relevant stuff. The Anakin Padme thing, oh my God, I don't think I can roll my eyes any harder than I did in this film with these two doing their thing. Jumping ahead to the end, Anakin is turned to the dark side. He's slaughtered these Jedi children, giving into the dark side. He's under Palpatine's, influence now. Padme shows up on the planet, Mustafar, whatever, and he's apparently causing her to die of a broken heart. Oh, after having their children. I don't know, that whole thing with them, I just was so done and over with that relationship. I mean, I realize we have to figure out how Luke and Leia come into being and how they get hidden right away from Vader, but that relationship was.
Remind me about that. At the end of this movie, or near the end of this movie, Padme has twins, right? Do they name the twins in this movie? Or is it just inferred that it's
shit? I don't remember.
Do we know? I forget if we even know at the end of this movie. If not, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't mean to stop you guys. I just thought.
No, that's okay. I don't remember. I mean, it is definitely Luke and Leia. Like, I just don't know if they say the name, but I mean that's. That's at by the end of the original trilogy, we've established that they're twins and who their father is and stuff. So
they send one to Tatooine, right? And they send her to, I forget what they said.
Alderaan.
Yeah, Alderaan with Organa.
Right.
Yeah.
With Jimmy Smits.
So, Jimmy Smits. I would live with Jimmy Smits.
Yeah, you would, Brett.
A lot of people back then would have lived with Jimmy Smits. He was the it guy back then for a while.
So guys, we're getting some live comments from our friend Sam, as well as our friend Brian. As well as some other people who say yes, as each of the babies is born, they reveal the name of each one. So Brian, Sam, Felipe just got your message too. There you go. Thanks for waiting.
Can confirm. Yeah. It's I totally agree with what you're saying, Brad. It's very similar to what we've talked about with the Hobbit. Remember, when we talked about the Hobbit, we were like, this really could have been one movie, maybe two movies, but it didn't need to be stretched into three. It was a lot of padding. This was one story that could have been told comfortably over one, maybe two movies, but it didn't need three. You could cut a lot of this trilogy out, restructure some things, fix some of the script stuff, and have a compelling story about a person's seduction to the dark side. By the way, that is a kind of a sticking point. I guess if I'm getting very technical on things, we're led to believe the story about Anakin being seduced by the dark side, where really he's just kind of tricked and lied to by the dark side. Like, it's less being seduced and more like
manipulated.
It was you all along that killed Padme. Oh, I'm going to be evil now. I wanted to see more of that seduction of power, like him kind of like giving into it, something along those lines. Some of the fights in this are good. I like Palpatine. Okay, if there's one thing in the if there's one thing I really freaking enjoyed in the original, or I'm sorry, in the prequel trilogy, it's I guess the actor is Ian McDiarmid. He played Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. He was really over the top, but compared to a lot of the other actors who gave very stiff, wooden, like almost like I'm a Shakespearean stage actor performance, he ate up every fucking moment he was on screen. Like, sometimes it was over the top, sometimes it was hammy, sometimes it was like a cartoonish villain, but he went for it. I saw passion for what he was going for in every line delivery, so I like Palpatine.
What about you, Jim? What are your thoughts on this one? You've been a little quiet on this film.
Yeah, there's not a lot of details. I had kind of checked out after the second movie, to be honest with you. Not of this podcast. I mean of the series. And I know I saw this movie, but I remember it being pretty much just as bad as I thought the second one was, if not worse. And again, they were just going through a lot of gyrations to set up stories. It was obvious what they were doing. And so that we could get to the good stuff, which was episode 4, 5, and 6. I just don't. I mean, other than seeing the origins of Luke and Leia, and of course the origin of Darth Vader. Near the end of this movie, we get the rebirth of Anakin as Darth Vader. Kind of like a cross between this and $6 Million Man, right? He gets doesn't he get like an exoskeleton or something? I forget what happens, but I mean, we see it over and over again with like Wolverine and blah blah blah. It's the same thing, you know. We can rebuild this guy and but yeah, to see him come about. So my question is another dumb question, which I'm sure the audience of Star Wars fans will be able to tell me. At what point, and we may get to it later, at what point in the entire saga does Darth Vader even know that he has children? Like, does he? Yeah, like, I mean, obviously he finds out in this movie that Padme is killed, and I think that isn't that the last, kind of like the last step right after he becomes Vader. Like, he finds out Padme's been killed, and it's like, no, no, and he's now the transformation is complete, right? He is fully dark-sided. He's got enough, you know, vengeance in him to wipe out the galaxy. So, but I don't remember if at one point he's told that he has surviving children by Padme before she died, and that those two children are Luke and Leia. Obviously, at some point he knows he's Luke's.
Well, he definitely knows. He definitely knows by the end of Empire, which we'll get to.
Yep.
And shit, I don't remember. Again, this one is of the different movies. This is the one that I have the least recollection of, because I think, like you, I checked out a little bit on this one too. I was so tired of being disappointed by this prequel trilogy that this third one, like a lot of the plot beats, just went in one eye and out the other.
Yeah.
And I don't. I mean, what was the reception to this movie being the last? This is the most recent movie, right?
Correct.
And what was the reception for this one from the fan community?
You know, a lot of my friends loved this movie. They didn't like some of the same things we've talked about not liking, but they kind of felt like it was the strongest of the three films, and that's where I am too. So, you know, critical reception, I'm not sure. I wasn't reading movie blogs back then, but just from the people that I know, it was regarded better than the others.
This one had some pretty awesome space battles in it, if I remember right. That the first two really were kind of lacking on.
Yeah, I would say this is probably the better of the three movies. Unfortunately, it's like grading on a curve. Like it's still, the flaws are way outnumbering the benefits here. It's, I don't know, just it's disappointing. Like it was this whole trilogy. Like it really bummed me out for the longest time. It actually, when Force Awakens was first announced, I went through like a kind of a crisis of faith myself. Just like, do I really want there to be a seventh Star Wars movie? Yeah, I do. I want it to be good, but what if it's more of the same? And so I waffled myself, and it's all because of this. It's all because of just how much I was let down. Even the final sequence of this movie, like the 45-minute long fight scene, robs you of. It becomes so overly choreographed that it robs you of the character beats between what should be an epic showdown between Obi-Wan and Anakin. It just becomes like a really pretty CGI fight that goes on for way too long. This is the whole trilogy. It's described as having too much crammed into way too long of a runtime.
Nice. Well, Brad, what was it about this one that made it stand out and your favorite of the prequels?
You know, we have other movies to discuss, so I don't want to harp on too many things negatively. So I'm glad you asked a positive question. For me, it's probably just that final fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin. We finally understand why he sort of hates Obi-Wan so much. Obi-Wan has kind of become the stand-in for like every issue that Anakin has with the Jedi and with the whole attachment thing. Like, Obi-Wan becomes the focus of his rage. And so, you know, there's that. I think that was really well done in the end. Also, as disturbing as it is, Anakin going and slaughtering the younglings was a very pivotal scene. Like, these are kids, you know what I mean? who really look up to him as a hero. Even when he walks in the room, they're like, "Oh, Master Anakin, blah 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 blah," and he's all like cutting their heads off and stuff. Like that's pretty pivotal, in terms of like the slide of his character right to the dark side. So, I don't know. Those are just two moments for me that work pretty well. I just think, unfortunately, they're surrounded by a lot of things that were unnecessary. That sort of distract from that. So, real quick, we've got another live comment that we're going to go ahead and move on to the original trilogy. Sam has chimed in again and says, "I think the Emperor is the one who tells Vader in The Empire Strikes Back when Vader's having a conference with him. They're Skyping over the Super Star Destroyer system." And the Emperor is all like, "The son of Skywalker must not be allowed to become a Jedi." So at that point, obviously, I mean, Vader knows his last name is Skywalker.
Yeah.
So I think that's what Sam is getting at. And I remember that too. I just hadn't gone and looked up the quote. So yeah, Sam, thanks for having her back there. We appreciate it. So. All right, are we ready to put a fork in the prequel trilogy?
Yes, please do.
All right, sounds good. Brutal. All right, so Star Wars, later retitled Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope.
Yes.
Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, R2-D2, and C-3PO are back because they were in the prequel trilogy when R2-D2 had superpowers, don't forget. But they're here, and
they presided over the wedding. Right.
They did. They did, yeah. So in any event, this is the movie that came out first, chronologically speaking, in the real world, sort of kicked off this whole phenomenon. Would you guys say this was more space opera or soap opera?
Space opera.
Space opera.
What's the difference? What's the line?
There's a little bit of soap opera in there, but
well.
The line for me is that the relationships were told through organically through the story, not in an exposition-filled sit and talk and explain, who does what to who. Basically, they're telling the story of Luke and Han and the rebels against the Empire, the start of the rebellion against the Empire, and that's how relationships are forming. Like, relationships formed aboard the Millennium Falcon that first time was fantastic, right? You have, before that you have the relationship between Obi-Wan and Luke, which I thought was very well done, how they meet and what. And Obi-Wan doesn't give him the whole bit. He just gives him a little bit and kind of hints around at what's been going on and who Luke is, and Obi-Wan obviously knows more. But then when they get on the Millennium, in the bar, but then in the Millennium Falcon, we learn more about Han Solo. We learn a lot more about Princess Leia. I just love the way that the story unfolds. It's just not just laid out for us in a very dry way as it is with mostly in episodes 2 and 3.
Yeah, I mean, technically all 6 movies are space opera. It's just that the prequels draw a lot of the techniques that are used in kind of a traditional televised soap opera to help tell the romance. But a space opera has got outer space warfare and melodrama and adventure and chivalric romance and all of these types of things. It's and again, we see those in all of the movies. What I love so much about this, and I'm so glad we're back on the original trilogy. Like, I love Star Wars, and it's not fun to constantly rag on 3 movies that I legitimately don't like. So I'm here talking about movies that I do like now. This movie does a great job of show, don't tell. We're not told that these characters are going to have a relationship. We get to see it unravel naturally, and that's for all the relationships. The Obi-Wan Luke relationship, the way that they bond, the way that Luke and Han kind of go at each other's throats a little bit, but kind of develop a friendship, which is important through the series. We don't have long sequences where they say, boy, Han and Chewie are great friends. You just see that they trust each other.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing with Leia and her relationships with both Luke and with Han. All of these relationships develop on screen in front of us. We don't have to be told, like, this character is stoic, this character is gruff, this character is funny. We see it on the screen. If there's any true strength to this original trilogy, it's in how strong those characters are and how strong those arcs are all through each of the three movies. There's not a movie in that you could chop out and still have an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I agree. A New Hope is definitely very strong in the sense that you get to see everything sort of unfold. You get to feel the characters sort of organically riff off
Leia organically
in a way. Yeah. And I like that it doesn't shy away from, and this might get me in trouble, but it doesn't shy away from certain attitudes that are maybe not super kosher. Like, Han Solo is a cad. Like, he is a smuggler. He is not a super, like, nice person on the surface, right? Yeah. He's in it for the money, right? And there's
He's
even
a total misogynist.
Well,
say it.
So there's even a point, and for some reason, and this is probably awful, the line never stuck out at me until I was watching last time we went through the movies, Jim. At one point, they're trying to figure out how to get out of the Death Star, right? And Han Solo turns to Luke with Leia right there and says, if we just avoid any more female advice, we might just be able to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, holy shit! Like, Han Solo
Times have changed. Times have changed.
At no point is there a sequence where Luke and Leia sit on a couch for 30 minutes and say, Han Solo is a womanizer. We get to see him being a womanizer on screen through dialogue that is driven both by character and influenced by action.
And even later on, like, he and Leia, like, have this big blowout. She, like, storms off, on the Millennium Falcon. And he turns to Luke and says, you think a guy like me and a girl like her, after just having this thing where he, like, demeans her in every way possible, it looks like, no, of course not. It's just, I don't know. It's awesome. I like the interplay between the characters. I think that it works well. And, yeah, I mean, I wish that the prequel trilogy had this kind of organicness, but
I love the scene when we first see Darth Vader. That is a classic scene when he busts through that. When the stormtroopers bust through that hatch or whatever it is on the ship, and he comes out, and everything's white. The walls are white. The stormtroopers are, of course, mostly white. There's dead guys laying on the floor. And here he comes, and you got this wall of smoke, and he comes out through the smoke, and the music, I don't know which piece of music it is, the march of the whatever, and it's just now there's where you get space opera right there. I mean, that's a classic opera stage move, is to have a character bust out, and of course he doesn't sing, but he's barking orders at everybody, and right away that this guy's a badass, right? We don't know his history. We didn't see the prequel movies yet. You just know that he's a bad guy.
Yeah, it's a scene just kind of drenched in drama, and that's fantastic. And I don't mean like drama like intense like line reading. I mean just like the sweeping cape, the fog, the things, the parting. Like that's how you block a scene. That's how you make a character have a badass sequence. Again, we don't have people sitting around talking about Darth Vader being a badass. We get to see him walk on panel and go, oh man, this guy's a badass. We also know very little about him in this first movie too.
We know nothing.
Yeah, exactly. You know that. I mean, he's almost like if you think like a Nazi movie, like the one guy who's like the lieutenant whose job is to come in and kind of say like, you've defied the Führer, we're going to fuck things up. It's like that's kind of his job, is to just kind of walk in and be a badass, and we get to see more and more of him. I almost wonder if that's one of the, maybe the prequel trilogy is inherently flawed. Maybe we don't need to know the backstory to Anakin for him to be effective. Maybe less is more. We do have a comment here. Felipe says, I'd say it's a space western. Absolutely. It draws from... so there's a lot of parallel between like space western, space opera. You have this kind of like this roguish group of outlaws going about things out in space. Totally, I've seen that. Analogy made before, Felipe, and I agree completely. It falls into that very, very closely. Same thing with like there's a lot of that same DNA in probably more on the nose example like the Firefly/Serenity series.
Mm. So can we take a minute? I just want to ask a question. Does the whole... Will, you mentioned we live in a post 9/11 world now. Does the whole Empire parking the Death Star above Alderaan and blowing up like 8 billion people, does that strike a nerve in a post 9/11 world at this point? You think that's something we'd see in a current day Star Wars movie?
Nowadays, yeah. Probably not in that first few years after 9/11. I mean, we did tread very lightly post 9/11. Nowadays, we've gotten more comfortable with like getting back to big explosions and big things. There's more subtext to those types of scenes now because we do have something that's more of a cultural touchstone for us, something that we can all relate to.
Yeah, I don't know if it changes things or they wouldn't do it today. I mean, we just watched, Brad, we watched an episode of Enterprise, and I won't give away what happens, but something happens the attack on Earth, you know what I mean, what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And that was has a pretty close parallel to 9/11, and I believe that was produced after the attacks, right, on the World Trade Centers.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And so it's not that I don't think that movie makers are shying away from that, or they should, but it definitely, you're right, Will. It can give it a totally different subtext, give it more gravity, when it's used, as long as it's not, as long as it's not made light of. I think it's fine.
And we've even seen that films like Man of Steel had, at the citywide level. Even Star Trek Into Darkness had something that was more kind of akin to it, maybe not to the same degree, but we do see that still in science fiction. But yeah, it does carry different weight.
Indeed. All right. Well, speaking of more weighty, I think now's a good time to move on to The Empire Strikes Back.
Yes.
So, yes, this is my favorite movie of the three. That's a very common thing to hear from a lot of people. Jim, I know you disagree. We can talk about that in a second. But here we get Yoda for the first time, if you have not seen the prequel movies, doling out some Jedi wisdom. We get Ben Kenobi as a Force ghost again. Still fucking lying to Luke at every chance he gets. He's such a lying asshat. But yeah, so we get sort of Luke's secondary indoctrination into Jedi life. There's so much to love about this movie. Oh my gosh, I'll just call out a couple things. The cave. Remember your failure in the cave. That whole scene where Luke goes in and Yoda's like, your weapons, need them you will not. And Luke is like, fuck you, Yoda, and puts his weapon belt on anyway and goes down there. And Luke's brashness, a lot like Anakin's brashness in the prequel series, ends up getting him into trouble. Instead of going down there and having this cool Zen Force vision, he ends up fighting against Darth Vader, who turns out to be a vision of himself, and it's a very disturbing, kind of crazy moment. And in a way, it's kind of foreshadowing, right, for the big reveal that's coming at the end, that Vader is in fact Luke's dad. Right, and that's obviously a very iconic, historic scene. But not only the Jedi stuff, the stuff happening with Han and Leia, like on the Millennium Falcon and the asteroid belt. In a way, that's sometimes more exciting to me than some of the Jedi stuff. You know what I mean? And these movies do such a good job of balancing the mystical stuff with the space sort of westerny stuff that it makes it really exciting for me. How about you guys?
Yeah, this is my favorite of the original trilogy, and the reason for it is I think it's the one that has the strongest plot forward to backward through it. We get to see the characters develop in ways that build on what we had in A New Hope, that continue with the things that we've got here. Not only do we get to see the protagonists develop, but I would argue that this is the first one where we got to see one of the antagonists develop personality-wise too. Vader was badass in A New Hope, but this one we get to see more kind of what's behind the veil, so to speak. It also has some of the best, like, just kind of hands-on, like, one-on-one moments in the movie. In the entire series. Battle of Hoth is brilliant.
So good.
To have a space battle set in a snow atmosphere is inspired. It's one of the best, like, snow sequences in probably all of film, you know, outside of, like, Citizen Kane and The Shining, probably. And in that battle sequence, we get to see, like, the bond between Han and Luke. We get to see some cool, like, you know, ships doing some dogfighting. We get to see development on a lot of fronts. We also get the, like you mentioned, the Luke and Leia. I'm sorry, the Han and Leia relationship grow. We get to see that beautiful lightsaber duel at the end of the fight. Now that is a strongly choreographed fight. My favorite choreographed fight of the entire 6 movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't need a bunch of flips and turns and things like that. Every sword stroke is mired in the emotion of the sequence. But this is this epic showdown between the guy that killed Ben Kenobi and the guy that was trained by Ben Kenobi. Red versus blue, set against steam and silhouette. So much emotion. Luke has this newfound power, but he knows how corrupting this power can be. There is so much that happens, and even on top of all of that, we get that great monumental reveal at the end about, you know, Luke, you know, I'm your father. So there's so much to love in this movie. One of my favorite science fiction movies of all time.
Lots of praise so far, Jim. How about from your perspective?
Yeah, I like this movie. Not quite as much as you guys. I think I just love the basicness of the first movie and kind of the novelty of that. You know, again, it was the first one I saw, and so that's going to be hard to shake. But yeah, this movie had its moments. You're right. That last lightsaber battle was awesome. I didn't like the Hoth battle scene as much as you guys. I thought the snowy stuff made it look a little bland and made the CGI-ness of it stand out a little bit more. I don't know. It didn't resonate with me as much. And you know, the monster in the cave and reminded me of a little bit of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer a little bit. But you know, like. But we see the you know what I mean? Like it's like Bumbles is like getting ready to eat him, and I know that's had to be part of the inspiration for that scene. Yeah, I mean, and of course the reveal. I mean that's a big dramatic moment, and everyone's like, "Oh my God!" It's a good thing we didn't have Twitter at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Came out. You know how many people would have fucking tweeted like, "Oh my God, Darth Vader is Luke's dad." You know, like, of course, we didn't know that at the time, right? No, none of us really knew that, did we? Well, it was hinted at, right, by Obi-Wan.
I guess if you understand German, it's probably hinted at pretty strongly too. I mean, his name is literally like Darth Father.
Yeah, true. But I mean, I think for a lot of people, I think it was a big reveal. Like, even if they suspected it, it was.
Sure. It's known as one of the the biggest like reveals in like history. When you think of big spoilers, like this is the one. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, the swamp scene to me was a little kind of a bathtub in the movie. And I know, Brad, you liked more of that mystical stuff that happened kind of in, you know, where he kind of hones his abilities as a Jedi and learns to use the Force a little bit more, or learns to control the Force through himself. But yeah, I like I said, I like this movie. I think for me, it's probably my second favorite of the series, but just a notch below Star Wars: A New Hope for me.
So I want to talk about that training sequence for a minute. So, and Jim, I'm glad that you brought it up again, the whole mysticism thing. I liked that we didn't just get like a Rocky montage where he's like training with Yoda to some stirring music and then he's ready to go face Vader, right? Like, first of all, we see him try and fail. Right, he tries to lift the X-wing, but because of his own mental issues and problems, and again, he's brash. He's kind of whiny. You asked the impossible. You know what I mean? Like, we see him not be like the stellar, awesome Jedi. Right, and so Yoda has to like just quietly like show him, that this can be done and that it's totally a mental thing. And in a lot of movies, it'd be like, oh, that's the big moment where, like, everything turns around and let's finish out the montage and go fight the big bad, right? But Luke still fucks up. He still messes up. And there's a parallel here to Anakin growing up that I want to touch on real quick, and it's the attachments. So in Empire, Luke is learning to use the Force. He's starting to have these visions of Han and Leia and Chewie in danger in Cloud City, right? And Yoda's like, you're seeing the future. It's something that could happen. The future's in motion. You don't know for sure that it is. And Luke's like, well, I have to go save my friends. And Yoda's like, if you leave now, your training's incomplete. You can end up falling to the dark side. You need to stay. And he's like, fuck you, Yoda, I have to go save my friends anyway.
He says exactly that. I remember that.
Yeah, he totally does. He totally does, right?
That was in the director's cut.
It totally was, right? But that's totally an Anakin frickin' Skywalker move right there. Like, eschewing what the higher-minded ideals of the Jedi Order are trying to instill in you because you know best and your friends are more important than the whole universe, right? Now, it ended up turning out okay for Luke. In the end, by the end of Return of the Jedi, maybe? Question mark. But that was a really pivotal moment to me.
Yeah, the swamp scene was great for me. It worked for me as well, Brad, because we get a chance to learn more about the Force, what it is. We get to see someone train. We're getting to experience kind of for the first time, I guess second time, we got to see a little bit of it in A New Hope, how someone goes about like learning this thing. We get to see it firsthand. We get to see it through failures. We get to see it through some successes, but not dramatic successes. And I think, again, like in the prequel trilogy, we get to see a lot of people using the Force, but it was just sort of an assumed thing, like people can just do it. We don't get to see Anakin learning a lot. Every so often, Obi-Wan will like yell to him, "Don't be reckless," and that's kind of like his training, right? Whereas here we get to see Luke is our lens. We get to follow him into this world, and it's great. It lets us understand this thing more clearly. I thought that was a really strong scene, and it makes the stuff that we're going to talk about here in a moment when we get to Return of the Jedi, like, will Luke fall to the dark side? It all pivots on the stuff that he learned in the swamp.
Absolutely. And one last comment here before we move to the next movie from Felipe. He says the Empire is his favorite of the series. He says he loves that we get to see Han simply being Han. So we've talked a lot about Luke, right? But now let's focus on Han for a second. He says the man parked the Millennium Falcon on the back of a Star Destroyer.
Yes.
Yeah, that was pretty quality Han moment right there. Pretty awesome, right? Plus that relationship with Leia, right, turns from one of like, misogyny and abrasiveness,
quippiness,
to quippy vulnerableness in a way.
Hey guys, I love you.
I know.
Yeah.
That exchange right there. Those few words have more emotional weight than any of the Padme stuff.
Totally. Yeah.
Like all of it combined, just in those few words.
Yep. And Felipe, I love how you put it. Just seeing Han being Han. I mean, such a great character.
Just Han.
I'm gonna call out. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, are we ready to talk Jedi? Is it that time?
I think it's time.
All right. So, final film in the series. Jim, why don't you kick this one off a little bit for us? Give us your impressions on Return of the Jedi here.
Again, this probably definitely not the strongest of the original series for me. Probably the weakest of the original series for me. this one. What do we get here? Is this the one we get Han in a block of carbonite?
We do. Well, and so he was put into the carbonite in the last one, but now we get to see him. You're absolutely right, in Jabba's palace, right? And Leia has come to save him. Yeah, right.
This is the whole Jabba party, right at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you like the special editions, you get that new cool CGI number thrown in.
Yeah, and this had the fight with the what was the monster?
The Rancor?
Yeah, the one that scared you when you were a kid, right?
Totally. Oh my God, that thing terrified me.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I'm probably not the best one to kick this one off because I can't tell you a lot about what stood out about this movie. You know, what story beats are there to take away from this movie?
I know what stood out to you from when we watched it. The hairy-chested chub Rancor handler stood out.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew that's where we were going.
Yeah, we had a hot Rancor handler, but he didn't last very long, as I remember.
No.
Will, you mentioned that that Jedi maybe had some issues for you. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's the weakest of the original trilogy to me. I still think it's a good movie. I still enjoy this movie very much. There's a lot to enjoy here, but there are parts where it falls apart. Probably in the parts of the second and third act for me. I liked the all of the Jabba stuff. The Leia's bikini is such a classic nerd icon at this point. Like, that's really cool. We get to see a little bit more Boba show up. We get to see the Sarlacc pit, which this is why I'm gay.
Oh my God, Will! Talk about misogynistic.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
Did they burp?
No. No, but that whole opening sequence is really, really cool. We get to see, like, the characters do that little infiltration thing. I thought that was really cool, getting to see the characters trying on kind of their different costumes and sneaking in to try to get Han out. I liked that we got to see Luke in his all black, because this is the moment where you realize, like, oh, he's teetering on the brink of maybe converting to the dark side. We get to see that from very early on. And again, we don't get a lot of people going like, Luke could go to the dark side. We need to watch him. We just see him show up in all black and kicking a little bit more ass. We remember Vader being in all black, and we put two and two together. The parts that fall apart a little bit more for me, I'm not as big a fan of, like, the whole Ewok sequence. You know, I didn't hate them. I mean,
Lucas is starting to go over the edge here.
It's not the worst thing in the world, but it really felt like it diverted too much from the character-based stuff and more just on, like, things happening, and that's when we're exploring character, Star Wars is doing great. When things are happening, because we've got this epic war and things are happening, it falls apart a little bit for me. This is the only part in the original trilogy that does a little bit of that. It's not egregious, and there's enough other good stuff there, but it does. I would say the Ewoks are what makes this my least favorite of the original trilogy movies.
And the what do they call the things they ride through the forest?
There's little speeder bikes.
Speeder
bikes, yeah. Was that in this movie?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally not as good as a pod race. Sorry.
Yeah. Well,
this was them trying to match the excitement of a pod race, and they fell way short.
Well, and back then, like, green screen stuff was kind of becoming more prevalent, right? So they're experimenting with it, and unfortunately, it looks bad. Like, there's no getting around it. It looks bad.
Yeah.
Real quick, live comment from Sam. He says he'll take the Ewoks over Jar Jar any day.
Oh, hands down.
They can both go.
Preach. Yeah. Well, no, I actually like the Ewoks. I think they're a little overused. I actually like the Ewoks in the Ewok movie a little better than I did in
Yes. And the Saturday morning cartoon, which I watched the hell out of. Wicket.
Right. Love me some Wicket. But this movie had a lot going for it for me. Will, you mentioned the whole, like, Luke wearing black, he kind of being on the edge of falling to the dark side himself. I remember as a kid, I was so shocked when he just shows, first of all, we get the hologram of Luke, right? And he's like trying to negotiate through the hologram and da-da-da-da. That doesn't work, so he comes, he arrives, and he basically tells Jabba, give me what I want or I'll fucking destroy you. And I'm like, wait, isn't he supposed to be a good guy? Like, isn't he supposed to be able to talk this through? Like, he's going to kill this guy, really? And that's such a surprising thing. And then, we end up with things not going as Luke probably planned. He gets captured. But thank goodness there's a contingency plan in place because, Lando Calrissian is there in a cool outfit. And R2-D2 has Luke's lightsaber in his dome. And that scene on Jabba's sail barge and Luke is on the skiff with like the walking the plank scene. Man, as a kid, I can't tell you how much that scene thrilled me when Luke like steps off the diving board, turns in midair, grabs the board, flips up into the air, reaches out and calls his lightsaber into his hand that R2 shot into the air for him, and just like starts going.
Everybody holds up. All the Ewoks hold up a number 10. 10.
But I just, one of the things for me is like, yes, maybe he's on the edge of teetering to the dark side, but he's also come almost fully into his own, right? Yeah. As a Jedi with his skills. I mean, in the beginning of Empire, we see him struggling to even like move his lightsaber like in the ice to like come to his hand, and now it's almost like a thoughtless thing for him. Like he just reaches out, looks for it, and it's there. It sails right into his hand. So you kind of get to see at the beginning of both movies like where his skill level right is at, how far he's come. And yes, the whole Ewok thing doesn't necessarily work. The Ewoks capturing the rebel party and is kind of crazy. I did like Luke having 3PO pretend to be their god, though, and lifting 3PO in the chair. And the Ewoks are like, ooh. Like, I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. It's not that the Ewoks are inherently bad. It's that they're probably a little overused for that part of the movie. When there's other things to get back to.
Absolutely.
They're maybe too much of a distraction. But they're not inherently bad. I think there's some good scenes to be had there.
And again, this movie also does a good job of bouncing back and forth between the non-Jedi stuff, which is really interesting to me. Like, you've got Lando flying the Millennium Falcon, right? They're going to be tackling the Death Star. You've got Han and Leia, and they're trying to get the shield down, while at the same time Luke is up on the Death Star with Vader and the Emperor. Luke has turned himself in. So you've got three, different sets of people that we're moving around with. For me, it just keeps things fresh. It's entertaining. I like seeing this whole conflict sort of eventually coming to a head, and of course, we have the end game, right, with Vader and Luke again. There's this very iconic scene, and I talk to people about it, and they think I'm nuts and reading too much into it. But there's a part where Luke is like hiding up in the rafters. And Vader is talking to him about, like, if he won't turn to the dark side, maybe his sister will. And his face is like half in shadow and half lit. And for me, that totally signifies, like, he, right in that moment, is teetering on the edge of falling from the light to the dark. And what happens when Vader brings up his sister? He fucking jumps down, ignites his lightsaber, and starts trying to bash Vader's head in with his lightsaber.
Ain't nobody talking about my sister.
And here's the thing. I actually think Luke did fall to the dark side a little bit in those moments. He kind of comes back after he cuts Vader's hand off and throws his lightsaber away, but I think what Yoda was afraid of happening happened. And I think, I don't know what's going to be in The Force Awakens, but I know in the books, I mean, that's something that Luke has struggled with. And I hope that maybe that's something we'll see in the new movie. I don't know.
You mentioned the kind of the face half in light, face half in dark, and whether or not that was intentional is almost secondary a point. The strength of this series is so much so that we're so aware of this balance in this character between light and dark that we're able to pick up on cues like that and kind of see them. Maybe you're reading into them, but even if you are, it's all based on things that this film has given us, character motivation, struggles, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's the mark of a good movie.
Yeah,
agreed.
So, Brad, you touched on it a little bit about like where, kind of where do we go from here? And I don't know. It's a fine line for us to walk. We don't want, not that we've seen the new movie,
right.
Episode 7. But I know Brad and Will, you may have read books or comics or whatever. Do we want to like maybe talk a little bit about how Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, maybe sets itself up for something in Episode 7. What do we think will be important to recall or remember from Episode 6 as we go forward?
One thing to note, and Will, I can see your face, so I know you have a thought to share. One thing I'll just say first, all the books and comics and everything at this point have been nullified by Disney. They're no longer considered canon, except for a few things that they've been releasing on
like the new comic book series are canon,
but
there's only a few in
Right, exactly. So anything we may have read in any of that other stuff the last 20 years, it isn't real.
Yeah.
Right.
For me, it's less about any one specific storyline beat that I want to see. I mean, what I want to see is I want to see things that are based in character. And I know that's such a cop-out answer, but it's the thing that made the original trilogy work for me. It's the thing that I hated about the prequel trilogy. And I think all of the right elements are there, at least from what I've seen in the trailer. There's probably going to be some sort of link to what happens to either Luke's children or his lineage or the people that he's trained, or maybe Han and Leia, their children, or whatever. I think those types of bonds, those types of struggles that they face, if they can interestingly mirror the struggles that have happened before while also forging new paths, that stuff I want to see. I want to see all of the character beats happen in scenes of action, and I don't mean like swords being swung or what have you. What I don't want to see is, again, I mentioned this before, I don't want to see just a lot of people sitting around on couches talking about distant politics. I want to see things that are based, even if they're sitting around the Millennium Falcon and having like a quick laugh, that's compelling character development for me. So, yeah,
I think I want to see the new movie create some more, like iconic, compelling moments that, for me, like the Star Wars: A New Hope did. The Darth Vader appearance, the lightsaber, the first awesome lightsaber battle, which was at the end of that movie, where Obi-Wan, is killed. And that whole like, oh my God, they just killed Obi-Wan, like right there in front of us. Just thrilling scenes like that is what I want to see, regardless of how the story goes.
And there's potential there, right? Because now we have these characters that we know and love so much, and we're excited to see again on the big screen. But nothing says they have to survive this movie.
Right.
And maybe our Obi-Wan moment is going to be Luke being killed. I mean, we don't know anything really about what Luke is doing in this film at this point.
Right.
We haven't seen him in any real promotional materials. Or maybe Han Solo is going to die. You know what I mean? I mean, you have no idea, right? Mm-hmm. But obviously we're paving the way for a new generation of Star Wars, new characters, and it's the hero's journey. Like in these 3-act structures, there's always like you have the mentor that sort of sets the hero on his path, takes him a certain way, and then eventually has to fall away so that the hero can take his or her rightful place, right? In Harry Potter, spoilers for Harry Potter, Dumbledore has to die at some point for Harry to really step up and, do his thing. Obi-Wan has to die for Luke to do his journey originally, right? So I think that we may see something like that. Right. The other thing is that I'm wondering if we're going to come full circle in the sense that maybe the offspring of the Skywalker line might be a bad guy.
Well, that's been the through thread of all 6 movies is really the Skywalker lineage, right?
Yeah.
Right.
From the first movie, from Episode 1 all the way through this one, and you have Luke as the son. So it would kind of make sense to continue that in some way, or they could totally veer away from that, which I think might feel odd because you just had 6 movies that have set up this lineage.
Right.
And then all of a sudden abandon that might feel a little bit weird. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do this.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've only seen a teaser. You guys have maybe seen a little bit more than I have. But from what I've seen, I kind of expect it to carry that torch a little bit.
Mm.
That's what I'm hoping will happen, honestly. Like, in such a way that it doesn't get mired in the old characters. Like, the torch has to be passed. The torch has to be passed to the new generation for this to work.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Well, speaking of passing torches, guys, I think it's time to move on to some plugs. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good.
It's been a great Star Wars discussion. I think we could talk about it even a lot longer than we already have been, but I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say when The Force Awakens comes out later this week. Catch our coverage next week. But plugs, Will, what do you have this week?
So there's this movie coming out this week called Star Wars: The Force Awakens. No, I'm not gonna.
Really?
I'm not gonna plug Star
What a
Wars.
coincidence!
Don't say. Wow.
What a wasteful plug that would be. Like, at this point, like, Star Wars is coming out. I guess the thing that I'll plug is something that came out a little while ago that I didn't get a chance to see until recently, and it's Shaun the Sheep. So. This is an animated movie that came out, I believe it was kind of late spring, early summer. So like in August. This is a movie about this sheep and these other sheep, and they're going into the big city to kind of help out their old farmer after a mix-up happens. It's by the same people that do like Wallace and Gromit and things like that. No dialogue. It's all done in just kind of like, they have like little talking, but with no actual words. I've heard a lot of buzz for this movie. Like, it's Rotten Tomatoes was something like, I don't know if it still is, but it was something like in the 90s, which is really good. I liked it. Not the best animated movie. There's a couple others that came out this year that I like better. Yeah, it's sitting at 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. But it's quite good.
High.
But it's quite good, and it's especially good. Like, if you just want something kind of. A lot of the really good animated movies that we talk about have a lot of emotional depth, and that's great. I love that. This one is very light fare, but it's really good light fare. So if you just want to watch something good with your children, just something where everyone just kind of has a fun time on a movie night, Shaun the Sheep is worth checking out. It's on VOD.
Yeah, well, I mean, awesome. I saw the same buzz you did, and I was like, this is kind of a late buzz that I'm seeing around this movie. It's like not much was talked about like when it came out, and now all of a sudden we're hearing about it. It's a little odd, but maybe it'll make my list if I can fucking find time to put it, see more movies. That's always the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, Jim, what do you got?
I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and a trailer came out today. For the new Star Trek movie. Star Trek.
Yes,
we didn't talk about it. I guess we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could both talk about it. How's that? So, I mean, it just dropped today. Apparently, it's going to be shown in front of the Star Wars movies in a lot of places. So that's interesting. And man, the buzz. Like immediately on Twitter and in the blog sites was at least 75 or 80% negative on this trailer. Of course, we have Justin Lin, who's best known for his work in the Fast and Furious franchise, coming in to take J.J. Abrams' spot. After J.J. successfully, I think, kind of re-energized the Star Trek movie universe with a new cast, which I think is really good. We can argue about whether the two movies were any good. I liked both of them, but while not perfect, I like both of them. And this one looks exactly what you'd expect for. I mean, I like the Fast and Furious franchise. I love the fun that is in those movies. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays against the less fun, more serious Star Trek world. So I'm excited for. I'm always excited for another Star Trek movie, Brad. I'm pretty sure you're probably excited too. Although I don't know what you thought about the trailer. So I enjoyed it. There's not a lot you can tell from it about what really the story's about and what the overall tone is going to be. Because this one was just a teaser trailer, I think. It was
just a teaser,
like a minute long or something. But
I think it's just under 90 seconds. But it's not like a full-on trailer at this point.
Right.
But yeah, I'm excited about this too. I actually want to go back and watch it again on the big screen downstairs. I watched it on my phone earlier. That was a mistake because, see it on the biggest screen possible.
Right.
Can't wait to see it in front of The Force Awakens. But yeah, I really love where the Star Trek franchise is going. Thanks in large part to Abrams. He did not direct, but he's had a hand in some of the production or some of the producer duties, right?
Of this one?
Third film? Yeah.
I believe so. I'll have to look.
Yeah, he's done some consulting. So I'm excited to see where the movie goes, although I'm not super excited about the director. I know you love the Fast and Furious movies, the last couple. I mean, I enjoyed too, but just something about like mixing that directorial style with Star Trek has me a little bit worried, but we'll see. I think it's adorably cute that when you were talking about Star Trek, you said the word energize. That
right, and that was totally unanticipated and unplanned. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing that you picked up on it. That's even even more amazing. But yeah, Brad, you're not alone. I about 80% of the fan base was a little, and some of them aren't even fans. They're just people who want to sit back and snipe. You know, the blogosphere and the Twittersphere and the Facebookosphere is loaded with snark and negativity these days, so nothing really surprises me. I just, I know that I'm personally kind of excited. I will definitely go see this movie in theaters, and I hope that it's good.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. I mean, I'm not as big a fan of the Star Trek movies as either of you, and I came into this kind of not caring about the new director one way or the other. Some people are like, oh, he's going to ruin it, or some people are like, yeah, he's going to bring this new thing, and I was just like, oh, fuck it, I don't care. And so I walked away from the trailer thinking like, okay, yeah, this looks fine enough. I'm maybe not blown away, but there's nothing that looks bad, so I'm on board, sure.
Here's what's super interesting about this one. This one is written, or at least co-written, by Simon Pegg, who the nerd community knows is one of them, and they love this guy, right? I believe they love Simon Pegg because he's proven that he's like one of them. He reveres Star Wars, Star Trek. He loves all that stuff. Now he's got a hand in this movie, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if like I said, I hope this movie's really good, but if it doesn't and he takes it's going to be interesting to see how the community kind of might turn on itself a little bit, like it already seems like it is. So it's interesting because I think the nerd community has a stake in this movie, with having one of their own involved directly in the writing of it.
Indeed. All right, well, I think that's a wrap for us, guys. Man, we set out to do like an hour and 15 minutes, and we did almost 2. So, lot to talk about. So much to talk about. I think we could have talked about even more, but it's all good discussions. So, thank you, as always, for those of you who joined us, Felipe and Brian and Sam. Thanks for writing in tonight. Always good to hear from you guys. And we will definitely catch you all next week after we see The Force Awakens over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Have fun. Be safe this weekend. Go see the film. Don't do anything crazy. If you take lightsabers with you, for God's sakes, don't get into mock lightsaber fights and end up hitting some old lady over the head accidentally because you're being careless. That would not be fun. A Jedi would not hurt an old lady, so don't you do it either.
And don't spoil the movie for other people. Don't be that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't be that
definitely. Guy. Yeah, like, don't do it. Jedis wouldn't spoil either. Unless you're a Sith. The Sith would spoil.
Yeah, but
Darth Maul would be like, guess what,
with,
everybody?
Go with your friends into, private chat areas or go out for a drink after you all see the movie and talk about it. But try not to spoil anybody on social media.
And for God's sakes, don't walk out of, like, the theater you were just in and, like, walk 5 feet to where everyone's standing in line and choose that spot to talk about your reactions.
Oh my God! I can't believe that Vader was Luke's father all along.
Oh, it's okay. They're just standing in line. They can't hear us talking at the top of our lungs. So
yeah, don't be that guy.
Do not be that guy. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.